It is May the 2nd of 2026. You're waiting at an airport with the rest of your family. The small vacation you took was expensive and tiring, but it was fun, even if you are thrilled to get back home and rest. Suddenly, you begin to see people gather by the screen where just 10 minutes ago your return flight had been announced. Now, instead of a gate number, some red letters pulsate against the black backdrop. Cancelled. You turn towards your family as some cold sweat and hot anger flood through your body. You run towards the large window in the back. There, you see something strange. The airport is filled with Spirit Airlines planes, just waiting. Phones begin to ring. Then an announcement is heard. No news for the moment. Please wait. But you open your phone, and there you find it. Breaking news: Spirit Airlines has gone bankrupt and ceased all operations, which means that you are stranded. And the confusion in everyone's faces is simply asking, how could this happen? What we have described took place all across the United States, with thousands of passengers, many with their ticket already printed and waiting by the airport, experienced the collapse of one of America's most notorious low-cost airlines. During the 2010s, Spirit Airlines managed to carve a niche in the market and compete against other national airlines by asking a simple question. What about the service of flying could be removed, and how could those savings be passed on to consumers? In economics, the idea of occupying the role of the cheapest alternative is often seen as a race to the bottom, that it would undoubtedly cause the company to succumb under the weight of their own cheap consumer base. But this was not the case for Spirit Airlines, at least not at first. The visionary move to strip down the business of air travel to the essentials of the service offered, while criticized by the media and consumers alike, proved for over a decade that the public was there for lower fares and lesser service. No one would outwardly show love for the brand or the experience, but ultimately there seemed to be a group of consumers willing to accept the deal offered by Spirit. Pay less, get less. Now, it is important to point out that in the airline business, a heavily regulated industry, very few mechanical changes could take place to reduce operating costs. I mean, flying with only one motor or less gas than required by law is not really possible. So, what gave? The answer is the experience. All the airline staples were constantly being questioned. Do you really need that much legroom? Do you really need a small tray to lay your food while aboard? Hell, do you even need to serve food? Those questions were the key to reduce operational costs. And those were a sacrifice that Spirit was willing to make. But they didn't just pocket the difference while still charging comparable prices to other middle market companies. They took the concept of low cost to heart and passed the savings onto the consumers, undercutting some of the direct competitors in the US like Delta. And people for whom low prices were more important than comfort simply took the deal and flew. Were they uncomfortable in the plane? Probably. Were they hungry? Most likely. Did the thin seats lead to some uncomfortable contact with the person sitting next to them? 100%. But hey, it was cheaper. And it turns out that what many people wanted out of an airline was just the process of moving from A to B. The stale peanuts or reclinable chairs were completely unnecessary. But it was not only the customers that won. Spirit stock raised as the margins kept on growing through the 2010s, with it moving to around $50 a share as their model and their bet were welcomed by Wall Street. Their market share grew as well during this time, with more and more people begrudgingly choosing them over more expensive competitors. No one was happy, but everyone loved to travel cheaply, and all throughout 2018 and 2019, Spirit even modernized their fleet to catch up with new technological requirements of their industry, but still keeping those margins high and tickets prices low. So, what could go wrong? In 2020, the pandemic hit and brutalized the travel industry. The possibility of traveling abroad, or even within some countries, became severely limited and forced the world to stay put. Many companies, low cost or otherwise, suffered tremendously, seeing in some cases their revenues cut to about a quarter of what they would have been in 2019. For Spirit, it was brutal. Their revenues froze and Wall Street ran from the company with the same ease they had flooded into it. It was a bloodbath. By the end of 2020, the stock had lost nearly 50% of its 2019 highs, and even reached some measly $12 a share briefly. It was the darkest times for the company. Or so they thought, for it would seem that even darker times were ahead. In 2021, a surge in what many economists call revenge traveling took place, a furious reawakening of the sector that brought new reaches to many of the companies that had managed to survive the horrors of 2020. This was a breath of fresh air for Spirit. The revenues increased, and the world seemed to be back on the way that it used to be, at least when it came to the airline industry. But it would seem that the low-cost travel industry was changed forever, and there was no way to return to the high-margin, low-cost model of the 2010s. Spirit found itself with over $3 billion in debt, in part accrued during the year of reduced operations, and in part due to the damage sustained to the low-cost model, which was no longer profitable as it was once. Some sources indicate that the model became completely unprofitable. Spirit sought a light at the end of the tunnel, to be merged and absorbed by the company JetBlue, a larger entity that sought to satisfy all of the debtors of Spirit and acquire all of their assets and operations in return. We're talking about the 2026 death of Spirit, but let me be clear, this company has been staring into the abyss since 2020. Alas, this solution, this one silver bullet for the struggling airline, got blocked due to antitrust laws, judging the merger of the two companies as a potential danger to the competitiveness of the sector. Spirit tried to fight the resolution, but eventually it was all lost. By 2023, the DOJ made their stance firm, and the indebted airline could only despair as their stock crashed to $10 at its lowest point. A company that had spent a decade perfecting the leanest form of air travel while growing their margin was now being devoured by debt incurred from a poorly timed renewal of their fleet of planes, an unprecedented pandemic, and antitrust legislation. All throughout 2024, the company continued struggling. But ultimately, in November 2024, they did hit a bell, and their first bankruptcy was filed, with their stock crashing to about $1 at its worst. This was the end. By 2025, they refiled for bankruptcy and the creditors took over, with their ceasing of operation taking place May of this year, as the war in Iran set petrol prices rising, making it completely unprofitable to perpetuate the business model or even honor sold flights, resulting in many travelers getting left stranded across the country. The same company that had dominated the low-cost industry in a country that had embraced the shifting trend of air travel, an airline whose stock price had reached the highs of $50 about a decade prior, arrived into 2026 with merely 20 cents per share, a collapse of monstrous magnitudes. The revolutionary idea of stripping the fat out of the industry turned into a bad dream, product of unforeseen circumstances, increased competition, cunning judicial rhetoric, and sheer bad luck, frankly. So, who killed Spirit Airlines? There are many guilty parties of the eventual death of this American Goliath. Let's start with the competition. Delta and other middle-market companies were blindsided by the revolution that Spirit brought into the market. Their ability to spot unnecessary parts of the service and strip them off while remaining compliant with legislation were something never before seen in the airline industry. But as their public grew, and so did the margins for low-cost travel, all of these competitor airlines did not just sit idly for 10 years. They sought to offer cheaper versions of their own economy classes, depicting many of the uncomfortabilities made notorious by Spirit themselves. A cheaper economy by Delta wrestled some market share from Spirit. The reason for this might be manifold, but perhaps the most notorious might be the brand recognition and underlying desire of safety for passengers. Nowadays, Delta is also recognized as, let's say, not the peak of travel experience, but back when Spirit was the standard for bare means flying, many people saw Delta Economy as a competitive, better version of the same low cost. Some people would argue safety, others brand recognition, but definitely the competition had a hand in Spirit's collapse. The second guilty party might have been the monopolistic legislation of the US. The merger with JetBlue might have managed to rescue the failing brand, clear out its debt, and allow the company to continue their operations under new, more stringent management. But the DOJ determined that their union would lead to a dangerous centralization of economic dominance in the sector, so they refused it. And to be honest, they might have had a point. I obviously am not going to argue against the American legal system, but the reality is that antitrust laws in the US, and frankly everywhere, are messy and opinionated as well as irregularly applied. So I am not going to say that the merger would not have created some monopolistic concerns, and I am sure that the competition of Spirit was very happy when it did not take place, but I'll say that I can see a universe where the same exceptions that are made every day with even larger giants could have been made with Spirit and JetBlue. The legal system also had a hand in the murder of the airline. It might have been a justified and legally coherent argument, but their death is also on their hands. Another group to blame might have been the consumers themselves. The deal promised by Spirit in the 2010s was not an attractive proposition. Pay less and get less. Many people engaged with it and enjoyed the reduced prices, but there was always that persistent idea of being mistreated by the company. Even if you pay little, your standards are not always set at the level of the price point. Human pride is a complicated thing, and even if you know that you're paying for low-cost service, to actually receive low-cost service, it is still a negative experience. No one cried for the fall of Spirit, except those that were grounded at some strange airports miles away from home. And in part is because they spent many years delivering on the uncomfortable promise for low-cost service. This might seem unfair, and maybe it is, but consumers are humans. And maybe the one thing that Spirit could not strip away from the business of travel is the baggage that humanity carries with it. And I don't mean suitcases and bags, but pride. To finish, we must also consider the possibility of negligent management by the leaders of Spirit. The same minds that came up with a new market niche struggle to reinvest their earnings into crisis-proofing the company. I guess that is as much as one can really say against them. The reality is that the collapse of the 2020 was a wild thing, unprecedented in modern capitalism. We could speak about how they should have had larger money reserves and have been more careful with the debt that they were incurring, but the reality is that none of us would have been able to do better at such an exceptional time. The very capitalist texture of our world changed then, and the economy halted for nearly a year. That is the story of Spirit, a company that revolutionized the air travel industry and spearheaded the shift in consumer habits that saw cheaper prices over comfortability, at least for a while still expanding their margins for the better parts of the 2010s era. Their achievements should not be forgotten. Now they're a dead stock and a bad memory of an age that could not survive the most significant event of the last 10 years. So, what do you think? Is the death of Spirit Airlines a tragedy or a deserved fall? Who do you think is the main guilty party? Let us know in the comments below, and I'll see you next week.